hit this button. My name is Nicole. If for anybody who I haven't met yet, it's great to see all of you again. And I am the community manager at Linum Labs. A quick introduction on our company. Linum Labs is a software development studio. You can learn or read a little bit more about what we're up to and some of our projects on linumlabs.com. I'm just looking at my notes. Firstly, I'm excited that we have two incredible speakers with us this evening. We have Aunnie, Patton, who is the founder at Intelligent Impact and has also done some incredible work in academia focusing on investment impact or impact investment and inclusive business within Africa during a time at the University of Oxford. And we also have Karl, who is the CEO at Snake Nation, a platform that provides creatives the capabilities really to monetize the content. I'll allow both Aunnie and Karl to further introduce themselves and their work in a few. But Karl is really an architect within the blockchain community in Atlanta, Georgia, in the States. And Africa. He will be sharing his insights on the creative economy and how we leverage the blockchain for impact for Snake Nation. So, a warm welcome to all of you this evening. As always, it's good to have you in the house. Feel free to ask any questions you may have. I'm noticing somebody's not on mute. There's just a little bit of feedback. Cool. So yeah, as always, it's good to have you in the house. Feel free to ask any questions you may have. Yeah, we want to have an engaging and interactive discussion. So I see some of you have already introduced yourself in the chat box. That means you've been with me for a while. Send a flag, send your name in the chat box and introduce yourself. And that way I will facilitate the Q&A session after. Yeah, and then as you may have noticed, this call is being recorded. This is for our broader community to have access to the conversation after we've all dialed off. So yeah, just another note to please put yourself on mute while our speakers are presenting. Yeah, I think that's it from me. Just a quick note for anybody who's new. Thank you. For anybody who's new, one of our core company's pillars really is community and education. So giving back to our local and global ecosystem through skill sharing. So this call is an example of that. So connecting you with industry stakeholders for you to further learn or explore blockchain entrepreneurship, whether you are a developer, student, or just getting a feel for the space. You can get access to our online resources on YouTube, Medium, as well as our newsletter for any events we have going on. And you can do that through our website, again, linumlabs.com. Yeah, I think with all that aside, I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, Aunnie, who I mentioned is the founder at Intelligent Impact. Aunnie, the floor is yours.
All right, there you go, unmuted now. Okay, so I am having some technical difficulty with my speakers. So I actually am sharing from my computer, but on my phone to talk. So can you guys, can you see my screen?
Yes, the power of tech. Thank you.
Yes. All right, okay, cool. All right, so I'm hoping this will continue to work. I have got both things open, so you can just tell me if you can't see anything. So I'm going to go over today looking at a few examples. I've picked just a few out because we only have a few minutes on blockchain for social impact. So I have a background in impact investing. I've been in this space for about 10 years. Impact investing is investments into organizations, projects and interventions that have positive social and environmental impact. Impact investors look for positive social and environmental returns as well as financial returns. So one of the things that's been quite interesting is, for me, spending the past couple of years working with emerging technologies. So blockchain as well as AI and remote sensing and IoT is understanding how we can use these technologies to create exponential impact. So I'm going to go over a few of the applications for social impact around blockchain, and I'm just going to look at 3 industry areas today. We're going to look at one example in agriculture, a few examples in financial inclusion, and then a few examples in land rights. I'm going to go through a little bit more of a case study in land rights, but I know we don't have a ton of time, so I'll just try and give a bit of an overview of what's happening in this space. Okay, so the best report that we have on this, kind of looking at it from a macro perspective, is a report that came out of Stanford in 2008, or sorry, not 2008, that would have been difficult, 2018, and what they looked at were the projects that could be identified using the blockchain for social impact. And it's grown, I would say, substantially since then, but at the time they looked at 64 projects. My guess, if we were to do another report like this, which I'm sure will be done, is it will be in the couple of hundreds instead of 64. But it's an interesting split. So you can see the types of organizations that are implementing these. So governments are very small. We're going to talk a little bit about governments when we talk about land rights. Mostly for-profit, some nonprofit in academia, and a bit in foundations. What we would find if we fast forwarded to 2018, 2019 is that there would be more foundations that would be involved in these projects. So the split on these projects is healthcare, financial inclusion, energy, a lot around philanthropy and aid. So there's a lot of money that is spent, as many of you likely know, actually just getting cash to whether it's disasters or to from donors to donor countries and aid. And blockchain is has a lot of potential opportunities to be able to disrupt this space. Democracy and governance, voting, and other types of digital governance, and then agriculture and land rights. So we're going to look at financial inclusion, agriculture, and land rights today. So if we look at it, I quite like what Stanford did here, looking at the time frame here. So actually the democracy and governance were the projects that were able to be a little bit quicker to the mark to be able to do proof of impact, as they called it, as well as land rights and philanthropy. The energy projects are taking a bit longer, and even some of the financial inclusion ones to be able to get from concept to proof. And it's fair to say that a lot of these projects are still at the pilot stages. So why is the blockchain interesting for impact across these areas? So we I'm assuming many of you live in South Africa, maybe not, but living in South Africa with the probability of corruption at all different levels of government and private sector. Obviously, the reduction of risk and fraud and increasing transparency is something that is incredibly important. And as many of you know that have worked within the blockchain space, actually having the ability to see these types of transactions is something that is incredibly valuable. Efficiency is another selling point, and then enabling a process or an action that wasn't possible before. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some smart contracts. And smart contracts are really at the core of this enabling processes that weren't possible before, particularly with financial inclusion. I'm a little skeptical of some of the reduction of cost claims, but we can have a discussion of that at a later time. All right, so let's start with agriculture. Just some quick facts on agriculture. So you may or may not know, but growth in GDP in agriculture is twice as effective at reducing poverty as growth in any other sector. This is because about 450 million smallholder farmers are farmer households globally, and those are about 70% of the world's poor living on less than $2 a day. So agriculture as an impact sector is incredibly important, particularly in emerging markets. And there's a huge demand for agricultural finance. This is not aid to farmers, but actually demand for the ability to have loans to be able to do various types of agricultural necessities as well as add-ons. Things like being able to do irrigation, being able to access input, being able to access things like someone's not and someone's dog is trying to have part of my conversation. So having things like access to loans to be able to build better and more efficient farms. So one of the key areas that blockchain is playing a role in are transparent supply chains. So one of the global leaders is a company called BEX 360, and this is one of the applications. They have a variety of applications. This is one of the applications. It's actually a coffee application. So many of you may drink coffee, but you might not know that 95% of coffee is produced in the global south, and 98% of profits are made in the global north. So it is a completely unequal supply chain, and to be able to better distribute, to be able to better pay farmers, there's a lot of different initiatives that are happening within the impact space. This is BEX 360's machine. It uses a combination of artificial intelligence and the blockchain to analyze coffee, figure out what the price of that coffee will be, offer a price to a farmer. That farmer then has a smart contract that they have essentially had executed, that they will have executed when the coffee is bought by the machine, and that execution then will result in them being paid within a matter of minutes or hours, whereas in the past it might take them weeks, which affects their ability to be able to reinvest in their crops. It also tracks the coffee process, and there's multiple organizations that are looking at how they can use the tracking of this process to be able to better facilitate consumers actually having an understanding of where their coffee is coming from and the conditions in which it is being grown. Next. There we go, financial inclusion. I'm sure as many of you know that there is about a 2 billion person gap in formal financial services, which means more than 50% of people in the poorest households are unbanked. Many individuals do not have access to formal financial services out of a due to the cost. Tools, it also includes organizations, so SMEs, small and medium enterprises, and there's about 200 million small and medium enterprises that don't have access to adequate financing, partially because they are financially excluded. So a few different ways in which the blockchain is helping, one of which is something called self-sovereign identities that many of you may be familiar with, may not, as part of the blockchain network. But an SSI is an identity that you create and you maintain, and it can be stored on a smartphone or computer. It allows you to be able to put together a digital box of claims. So many of you at home, I'm sure, have that box of necessary documents or folder or whatever it is that is important to you that you would save in the event of a fire. This is essentially a digital version of that. To be able to scale this, so to be able to walk around and have a key to something that unlocks your health records, your educational records, your identity records, your financial records, there needs to be an open source decentralized network that no single entity controls for us to be able to have this launched globally. Now, what's very interesting, so in the space, Sovrin Foundation is one of the first and kind of the largest that's been established to be able to govern what is the world's first SSI network. And here in Africa, ABSA is the first African bank to what's called a founding steward. This means that ABSA plans to be able to verify transactions. So essentially, the idea would be is you could apply for a mortgage with ABSA. And you would be able to allow them to verify your information, but not hold your information. So they would ping in to see if you were a real person, if your identity was verified by a national government, if you made a certain amount of money, and that could be verified by the revenue service in your specific country. So say in South Africa, it could be verified by SARS. You could have a verification around your credit score. All of these things would be able to be verified by the self-sovereign identity, but wouldn't necessarily, that information would not then be stored on ABSA's records. It would still be stored in your own self-sovereign identity, and your ability to allow them to verify that would be part of the application process, after which the information on their servers would just show that you are compliant. It would not keep your personal information. There you go. Banca is another organization that is working with financial inclusion. So the thing with self-sovereign identities and this digital identities is, for most of us, we have lots of information that is floating around that we cannot track. For those that are unbanked and that don't have information that has been shared, there is the possibility to build secure online profiles, essentially self-sovereign identities, to be able to build an identity. So what Banca does, and it works in East Africa, is it allows individuals that have not previously been banked to build online profiles, including using SMS-enabled phones. And this is interesting because you'll hear people tell you in more developed markets that self-sovereign identities have to have smartphones. And that's not the case. And Banca has definitely demonstrated that. The user can then keep track of their educational, so if they qualify for an educational qualification, a short course, a long course, you can put harvest information, they can create credit profiles, they can have actually create bank accounts, so not really bank accounts, wallets, which is quite important. They can open up bank accounts, they can apply for loans, and all of this is done through this essentially self-sovereign identity that is created by SMS. And all of that is stored, obviously, on the blockchain, and the individuals then have a key to that. Another example in the financial inclusion space is a program called Building Blocks that's created by the World Food Program. This is for refugees. Refugees living in refugee camps get daily, weekly, monthly remittances, essentially, from, remittances isn't the right word. They get daily, weekly, monthly vouchers that are handed out by the World Food Program and other donors. And what the Building Blocks program tried to do and has done at relatively large scale is to create the ability for refugees to use iris scans to be able to access these vouchers. So instead of these vouchers being handed out manually, they are deposited into wallets. And then the refugees can use an iris scan to be able to access the money in these wallets and spend at specific stores. The goal is for them to be able to create this into a full wallet. And there are multiple organizations that are working on digital identities for refugees, so that if they lose their digital documents and their accreditation and their educational qualifications, that they could keep these with them. There we go. And there's one last one on the financial inclusion side. The Walla platform, which is a American-founded but South African-based financial platform, is a zero-fee app, which is built on Ethereum, but they also use a variety of different blockchains to be able to do the different types of transactions that they do. And they are building out an entire financial platform that allows users to use the platform for free, and the service providers actually pay to be able to put their products on the platform, to be able to sell their products. And so users can transact, and then it's a freemium model, so users will be able to do higher cost things like send remittances for much smaller fees. But what's interesting is that they are starting to do lending with their dollar tokens, which are built off of the Walla platform, which I don't know, those of you that have been interested or potentially interested in how you could use cryptocurrencies to be able to do underwriting of loans is something that's quite interesting, I think. So lastly, and then I'll stop talking and taking my time. I'm probably done in about 5 minutes. Is just land rights. So I'm going to talk through a quick case study on land rights. So land tenure is something that is incredibly important. So most of the world's land is held by men, and a lot of land is actually not formally held. So there are a lot of reasons in which securing land rights can have huge impacts on reducing poverty and creating prosperity within countries, protecting owners' rights, disputes between individuals, and then sale fraud. So a quick example of this is the country of Macedonia. So the World Bank went in to help the Macedonian individuals be able to actually license their land. They went from no private surveyors to 249 licensed private surveyors, and the surveying of land went up to 99% over the years. and then registering a property went to 2 days. So the value of mortgages in the country based off of that work went from 450 million euros to 3.54 billion euros. So the ability to actually register land has a monetary impact on the betterment of the entire society. Don't need to do that. Here we go. Indigenous rights are also an issue. So having Indigenous rights recognized for land access allows individuals to be able to register land and to be able to then qualify for financing for land. And I have a case of Nicaragua here. So fraud and corruption and inefficiencies in policies, and it can be very expensive in a lot of countries to actually register land. And then insurance and actually safeguarding in real estate to make sure that it is actually your real estate can be very expensive. So about 30% of the global population has a title for their land. Now, if you don't have a title for your land, there's a lot of things you can't do. You can't sell it, you can't borrow against it, you can't use it as any sort of guarantee. Even building on it means that there's a lot of uncertainty. So how can blockchain help? So obviously, there's a lot of efficiencies and issues around residential land rights as well as corporate land rights. There's the opportunity to use smart contracts to be able to create efficiencies in processes from buying and selling. And there's also the possibility of creating more transparency to reduce documentation-based fraud. So actually the buying and selling of land that does not belong to people. So there are issues to be had in countries like Sweden, which I'll show you in a moment, that have very good systems, but have documentational challenges. And then places like the Republic of Georgia, where fraudulent transactions of land are very serious, and places like India as well, where there's market uncertainty. I'm going to skip through this, but imagine a blockchain-based system, and this is what I'm going to show you a couple examples of that are being built, where you can buy and sell your house essentially based on smart contracts without all the fees of lawyers or reduced fees of lawyers, and be able to automatically transfer land from one individual to another on a system where you know the transparency and the immutability allow you to complete trust in the system as opposed to in the individual. And this would allow land transfer between individuals both on a sale basis as well as on an inheritance basis, and would reduce the probability of fraud, corruption, and potentially reduce transaction costs. So using the blockchain means that we can have digital units that are impossible to copy. We can have digital files that can't be manipulated, and then there's digital processes that also can't be manipulated. Now, one of the issues, of course, is that you need land registries that are digitized. Most of the emerging market land registries are not digitized. You also need internet connectivity to be able to actually to start transactions, to complete transactions. To be able to figure out how to do geo-referencing and maps, it's going to be a huge issue. Digital identities, oops, there's a spelling mistake there, sorry, as I talked about before, will probably be necessary. And then there's the actual proving legitimacy of current land claims. So in a lot of markets, and South Africa is a great example of this, actually getting to the point where you can understand who has an actual land claim is going to be a lot of pre-work that needs to be done before anything can actually be done on a digitized system. So who's doing this work? Oh, sorry, the mapping. Mapping is also an issue. So who's doing this work? There's a variety of projects that are being done in the US, in Brazil, in the Republic of Georgia. Sweden is one of the most advanced, and there's also a blockchain land registry program going on in Rwanda, just to name a few. So you can see that throughout the map there's a variety of organizations that are looking at this and that will potentially be trialing and piloting at municipal and local government levels. And that is actually where I'm going to leave it for now, so that I can stay on time. There's, just as a closing word of thought, there are so many opportunities for the blockchain across all different types of social structures and sector levels. Seeing the ability to be able to create smart contracts based off of transparent systems is something that applies across a variety of sectors. and potentially has large implications for individuals across the world, but particularly in developing countries where access and rights in some of these areas are particularly constrained.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Aunnie. Thanks for highlighting all of the use cases and implications that could come from all of this. I wanted to ask if anybody had any questions, again, just to pop it into the chat box, or we could add it after Karl's presentation. But thanks, Aunnie. Karl, I think you can take the floor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Hope everybody's having a great day. I'm going to hop into my share screen here. And let's see. Here we go. Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
I can't.
You cannot? Okay. Let's see. Safari. Let me see. Optimize for.
So your screen's actually stopped. So your video stopped.
Okay, 1 second. I have to install the Zoom, the share your computer audio. So maybe I won't do that. 1 second. It's giving me a little bit of drama here on TikTok.
I see something. I see WhatsApp.
All right. Screen. Okay. Good. Good. We're getting there, people. Okay. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. Cool. All right. Okay. So, Snake Nation is a culture, content, and technology company. We're based in Atlanta, Georgia, Cape Town, South Africa. I'm going to give our explainer video a whirl here, and then hopefully that'll play okay and everyone can hear. Let me know if you guys can hear okay.
Maybe just manage the sound a little bit, Karl. It doesn't.
Can you hear?
Yeah, I think just maybe put it to 50% because the screen.
Can you hear okay, Nicole? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear. I'm just saying maybe put it to like 50% because the sound's a bit loud.
Disruptive media and monetization company based in Atlanta, Georgia, and Cape Town, South Africa. We are empowering creative rebels in film, art, fashion, tech, music, and dance to tell their stories their way. Build their audience, distribute product, and monetize their work in the global creative economy. The world is changing. Every day more diverse, more connected, more vocal. Where those that run the culture run the internet, and those that set the trends running their own economy. Into culture is now pop culture. Multicultural millennials are media tastemakers, super social, and the most diverse generation ever. They're culturally connected and mainstream influencers. And M2 have massive buying power, but their diverse culture is not reflected in traditional media or technology. So our first focus will be the intersection of African and African American culture. We've identified the $2.2 trillion creative economy as our target. This highly lucrative and monopolized economy is ripe for disruption. We're working with brands, government, media, technology, and banks to collaborate with, connect with the influential and hard to reach M2 market. Snake Nation empowers them to co-create through our campus societies, social studios, or online platforms. Quite simply, we're connecting the dots between fresh talent, their audience, and their revenue, and unlocking value on a global scale. Welcome home, rebels. Welcome to Snake Nation. Okay, cool. And so in looking at the creative economy, which I think is our real target, we look at the creative economy the same way that you would look at, lodging before it was disrupted by Airbnb, or transportation before it was disrupted by ride sharing, right? This is a $2.2 trillion economy, the likes of which are pretty much, all the players are big major studio players. And so when you talk about what that means to the individual creator, especially creators of color, they're largely shut out. I think currently about 85% of all the content that we consume is created by white males, and then the ownership of those companies lives in the 99th percentile white male, while the world itself is, as we talked about in the video, is changing, right? And so how do we start to utilize technologies like blockchain and social media to actually start to disrupt how people receive their content, how they're rewarded for their creativity? And so we have a multi-pronged approach, but first we're going to talk about snakenation.io, and this is currently in beta, and it's an authentic social platform where basically creativity challenges rules and dopeness delivers value. So your engagements on the platform, your sharing, your posting, your reposting, your overall creation actually drives a value that lives in a digital wallet. So this means that basically anybody that's a creator that sets up a profile on Snake Nation can essentially set up a profile, set up a channel is what we call them. They get a digital wallet, and then the Venom token, which is our token, then is embedded in the platform and allows us to actually deliver value to them for their engagements. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Our value proposition is basically access to a major market, which is largely the African diaspora market. So we have this unique combination of a footprint on college societies. We're right now in about 52 college campuses with Snake Nation societies, which are basically student-led clubs of young people that want access to the creative economy and are doing so along with Snake Nation, in partnership with Snake Nation. And we are now actually going to be rolling that model out to about 54 other countries. Right now, we're in 3 countries. We're in Botswana, we're in Lesotho, and we are obviously in South Africa, about 52 campuses. But we're going to be rolling that model out over the next year and a half to take us to 2,800 universities, and we could talk about that a little bit. But the goal is to create an ecosystem that what we call the M2, the multicultural millennial, can build their audience, distribute their product, and generate value for their work on their own terms. And we think that's super important. So I talked a little bit about the creative economy and why we're so passionate about utilizing the creative economy. So this is a map of where the creative economy lies. The source is from a study that was created by Ernst & Young and UNESCO. And what they looked at was, sort of this global footprint of the creative economy, what they call CCI, culture and creative industries. And right now, this generates about 30 million jobs worldwide and about $2.2 trillion worth of revenue every year. And so as you can see, looking at, Asia and Pacific islands, they have the #1 creative economy on the planet. They're tracking at about 3% of regional GDP, $743 billion a year, 12.7 million jobs. Europe is right behind them, 709 billion, 7.7 million jobs. And then North America, the U.S. is actually 3rd in place with 620 billion jobs and about 620 billion in revenue and about 407 million jobs. But if you take a look at Africa and the Middle East combined, we actually have the lowest share of the creative economy on the planet, which means lowest amount of jobs, 2.4 million spread across those 2 regions, as well as only 58 billion in revenue. So only accounting for about 1.1% of regional GDP. And anybody here on the continent knows that's probably largely coming from South Africa and Nigeria as like the biggest drivers of the creative economy. And so what happens is that this essentially equates to like a trade deficit for content and for cultural products. And so we're importing as a continent and as a region, we're importing way more creative product than we're producing. And so that value is not able to stay in the countries here on the continent and then generate economic benefit for the people that are here. And so what we're saying is that utilizing blockchain, utilizing social media, and utilizing this footprint that we've built on college campuses, we can actually start to roll out new models and new ways of engaging with the creative economy. Our why is very straightforward. We want to tell our own stories, our own way, globally, no holds barred. And really this, when you think about, especially as a creator of color, what your narrative means. And so one of the things when we started Snake Nations, we started to go around and set up and have these big regional meetings. And in one of the first ones that we did, I noticed that like people had a lot of preconceived notions of me in particular because I'm an African American. And so the next session we did, which was in Joburg, and we had about 50 or 60 college leaders there. And I said, before we get started, let me just, from show of hands, just, kind of shout out what you think about African Americans. And, don't worry, you won't offend me. And so, people shouted out thug, gangster, killer, nigger, drug dealer, this and the third. And so, it really, I said, okay, that's cool. It's cool. I said, so what do you think is the image of Africa to the world? And then again, to say disease, poverty, corruption, so forth. I said, let me just save you some time. It actually flies on faces. So the number one media image of Africa is actually flies on faces. And so my engagement as a member of the diaspora was actually that, Africa was this place full of poverty and you never want to go there and so forth. And so media and our understanding of each other is actually a very powerful tool in shaping our and shaping our narrative and believe is even possible. So we think that in order to impact our narrative, we absolutely have to be able to have creative and do all the years and years and years of misinformation that we're all kind of suffering under. Rebels, which is our target audience, we call the M2, the multicultural millennial. We hear a lot of talk research is that of the 2 billion millennials, actually 1.6 billion are multicultural. So millennials are largely multicultural, emerging markets. Media taste because they drive all the trends of super social media. Most diverse generation ever. They're super connected and culturally connected, but they're also a bigger part of this sort of, global youth culture, this mashup, this mainstream acceptance. They're a consumer giant. And so for actually in the States alone, when you start to tack on the buying power in Africa, which they say is going to hit, in the trillions in the next year, you really start to see economic juggernaut, right? And so we actually have here in sub-Saharan Africa, we have the second largest group of multicultural millennials on earth with over 300 million multiplicated here on the continent and largely in sub-Saharan Africa. So we're saying, wow, this is actually like the perfect storm, right? We have this changing in media. The world is changing. That's how we consume our content. We have this incredible buying power that's enough to like make anybody stand up and pay attention. But they also have a gap with like Black and brown stories and faces not being present in media, not being present in technology. I think when you look at the example of funding through VCs, you're at about 1% in America. Definitely here in Cape Town, the stark difference who's not. And so it's really like a situation where you're like, wow, I can't continue to thread on this existing system. How do we invent systems of our own, and how do we take advantage of the market dynamics? And so that really has been like kind of the overall landscape. And what we said was like, look, like you actually need to deal with the building a sustainable creative economy, right? And so, beginning with training, we start to understand like and we some of this program out in Burkina Faso. We take young and we put them, programming, content production, so forth. Then work with them. Am I over or no? I'm sorry.
No, don't worry about the
Nicole.
time. It's just the sound is cutting in and out. So don't Josh. It's just
okay.
the sound is a bit spotty.
Okay, cool. I'm sorry. I'll try to maybe come over here. Okay, 1 second. Let me switch locations. Maybe get better.
No worries.
Okay. Okay, cool. Is that better?
Much better.
Okay, cool, perfect. Yeah, we're in a building with a bunch of concrete walls, so apologies on that.
That's cool.
Yeah, cool. And so basically, what we've done, as you see here on the graphic, is saying, look, like this is some of it's training, a lot of it's like basically, giving people direct placement, on Snake Nation as a company engaged in the creative economy, but then as well, and just companies that are engaged in the creative economy, period, right? And then also, and absolutely tapping into public-private partnerships. Like, everybody should be invested in making sure that multicultural millennials are thriving, that you can't have world-class cities and economies without thriving creative classes, right? And so that's what we think, like everybody, from brands who ultimately want to find new ways for their message to reach their target audience and being more authentic, to government who absolutely has to address the epidemic of youth unemployment and poverty, media companies who are seeing, diminishing returns on traditional platforms, frankly, because like the content we're consuming doesn't look like us, doesn't reflect our story, technology companies who are looking at like emerging markets for their growth, and then obviously banking, who's also saying, well, how do we remain relevant to an audience that frankly has not been a part of the banking system and has started to figure out ways to move without them, right? And all of these people's and different stakeholders working together leads to jobs and opportunity, to communities that are thriving, to self-determination, so that we're not necessarily saying, hey, just get a bunch of jobs, but we're saying, how do we build opportunity so that people can stand on their own 2 feet? And then of course social impact, right? And so how do we get there? And the only way that you can actually get there is to kind of deconstruct and disrupt what's existing and build a machine like no other. And that's really what we've been doing over the last 3 years. And so we felt like it was imperative that there were no barriers to entry to get engaged with the creative economy. And so college societies, like we talked about, are super important to us. Social studios, which are physical spaces. Places for, which I'm calling you from Black Unicorns right now here in Howe Bay in Cape Town, which is essentially a live work space for creators and coders of color, and then online platforms. And so looking at saying, well, look, if we're not physically in a city where you can engage with us, if we're not on a campus where you can reach us, then you should always be able to reach us on online platforms through like snakenation.io and .co. And then using all of these different means of entry into curated member channels. And so starting to move people away from this idea of like social media platforms you don't own, in these centralized ways, right? And getting them on the platforms where you can monetize, where you can start to create value for your work, utilizing, Venom token, utilizing, technologies like ILP, Interledger Protocol, to help drive e-commerce and cross-border payments. And so we're basically saying, look, what are all the ways that we could utilize some of this emerging technology and to get people, a greater amount of creative and economic freedom. We then bubble kind of the best of the best up to the top, and then distribute that content out either to media partners or onto Snake Nation wholly owned platforms, and then engage with the ecosystem we talked about before, brands, government, so forth, to then distribute those dollars that would normally be going to the usual sort of big studio suspects that aren't giving back to the creative community, and utilize the platform as a way to distribute that revenue and ultimately those rewards, right? And we're just getting going on some of this. The snakenation.io platform is currently in beta, but we've seen a lot of promise already. And this is a glimpse. If you want to check out the beta site is snakenation.io, you can check it out there. And essentially what you're allowed to do is about 4 things. Create, repost, and share content on your profile. You can curate and aggregate social media content from your own accounts, be it Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, so forth. You can share your posts with Snake Nation members, as well as all your other platforms that you've connected to Snake Nation. And you can start to earn Venom tokens for participation on the platform. So again, your social media activity itself generates a value. For anyone that would like to see, this another example of this model in action, you can always check out Steemit, STEEMIT. .io, I believe it is, and you can check out those guys. It's super dope, but a very different culture and kind of a Reddit meets crypto approach. But we took some inspiration and said, look, we know that the engineering is possible, but really it's about the intention and the mission of what you're building. And then obviously, outside of earning, you can also curate. So the fact that we all live on multiple platforms, we just thought it'd be dope to kind of build in a curation function so that we could actually start to curate content according to hashtags. So if you wanted to do a crypto, hashtag crypto collab, you could do that, or our favorite, fuck Trump, because we all hate Donald Trump. So we have all different types of hashtags that we utilize as a way to curate content on our own channels. And then we work with our Venom token as a way to drive value. So currently right now we have 3 social studios. We're here in Hout Bay at Black Unicorns, which is a venture studio model, so a big work model. At Georgia State University at the Creative Media Industries Institute, which is a multi-million-dollar production facility with a heavy lens on gaming, VR, and AR. And then we're also members of the Shimalu Wong Innovation Precinct in Johannesburg with Wits University. And so we're basically in partnership with a lot of universities and saying, look, let's make sure that you're connecting these incredible resources that you're building into the creative economy, into these creative communities, and that you understand the needs of creatives and the needs of coders of color, right? Because lots of times people have these gleaming buildings and these incredible facilities, but don't have an actual understanding of the audience and actual understanding of the community. And so we want to make sure that we provide that as well. And then university societies. And so Snake Nation right now, like we talked about, we're on about 52 universities in Southern Africa. We're growing via our partnership. And these are basically, partially funded by Snake Nation. Students also do fundraisers themselves. They do a variety of events, hackathons, workshops, movie nights, poetry sessions, so forth, concerts. And we basically are helping to fill the gap in student creative activities, because obviously with sort of this fees crisis that's been happening on campuses, there isn't a lot of budget for extracurriculars, and so how do we keep creatives engaged at the same time that they're being creative and providing an outlet, but also allowing them a chance to actually start to participate and earn. And so that's what we're most excited about with rolling out the platform there. Is really being able to help them get engaged with the creative economy as a living. And so going on to growth, this is all the countries that we're going into, roughly access to about 8 million students, 2,800 universities, 54 countries. We're going to be rolling out to 20 countries this year, and then another 34 next year. So that we'll be on every campus in Africa and UAE as well by the end of 2020. And this is what we see as our expansion model. And so what we're planning here is in Southern Africa, figuring out about 150,000 members, and then starting to slowly ramp up. We're looking at about 15 million members if we were to include, and these are assuming, super modest adoption numbers, right? About 5% adoption numbers for the platform and for the Snake Nation model based upon the serviceable market. And so starting with about 8 million members, and then, next year looking at about 300 million total addressable members based upon, the amount of multicultural millennials in America and the US, and then continuing to grow that share as we go a deeper footprint into the US in 2021, and then starting to look at India and Asia and Brazil. So really starting to focus on where are the multicultural millennials living and breathing? How do we reach them on college campuses? How do we use the university as a way to connect everybody that they're friends with, then ultimately rolling and using the platform? And very interesting blockchain organizations like Colony, which is somebody we met at the hackathon that Linum Labs and the Ethereum community through a couple of weekends ago. And so we're looking at all these different ways to utilize blockchain technology for governance, for reward sharing and revenue driving. And so we're really excited about that as well. And let me go to the next slide. And so ultimately, this is how, a piece of content or a property can lead from the platform on the web and television, and then throughout everything from social media, brand sponsorships. These are the ways that you can monetize a successful property, a successful piece of IP. Global formats, apparel, licenses, so forth, feature films. So for example, you have let's say awkward black girl that went from being awkward black girl to being insecure on YouTube to being insecure on HBO, right? But what if Issa Rae didn't have to go to HBO in order to build and benefit from her audience? Where you're talking YouTube, you're talking about making about $2,000 every 1 million views. How do we start to trump that and build in other systems that allow people to have a little bit more creative control over their product? So maybe awkward black girl will be in his 10th season because they're generating Venom tokens and living in a digital wallet. She's got a global audience, right? So we just really want to kind of break break the existing model a bit, disrupt it for the good of multicultural creators and technologists. And I think that is the end of my presentation. Yes, that is the end of the presentation. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak with everybody, and I look forward to any questions. Thanks.
Oh, thanks so much, Karl. I am going to start off with some questions. I'll start off with some questions for Aunnie, which I know, Aunnie, you've already kind of answered it, but it would be cool to have a little bit of a discussion around it. So from Gino. Hi, Gino. It's nice to see you again. Question 1 is, what SA political party do you think will include the adoption of blockchain technology in government in their political party manifesto? So that's question 1.
Sure. Yeah. So I started to answer there because there's an actual link over there. I think that, to be honest, blockchain is kind of agnostic of parties. There's ways in which each party can latch on to different pieces of it. I think that from the DA's perspective in South Africa, there's a lot of interest in kind of the efficiency side. Helen Zille in the Western Cape and others in her what was her previous administration, which will obviously change with the election, are very interested in how they implement in things like land, education, back end of government processes. But there's also been white papers commissioned from the current government, national government, looking at cryptocurrencies and regulation, fintech. There's a fintech czar. So I don't know that it belongs necessarily to a party. I think that there's going to be there's increased opportunity for South Africa as a country that has such advanced financial institutions to start to implement blockchain technology within financial institutions. And we're already seeing that from a private perspective with some of the announcements that have come out. So I think that it would be great to see, it'd be great to see the ANC adopt the ability to use the transparency to continue to fight corruption and to increase government efficiency and potentially decrease costs to the states. So it'll be interesting to see if that's something that resonates with the government and with the rollout of what that could be. And I think it'll be interesting to see globally how governments are adopting different elements of the blockchain. I think what we've seen from a financial institution's perspective is that every major financial institution in the world has someone that's evaluating how they as an institution can adopt blockchain as their back end. So not necessarily cryptocurrencies. We've seen a lot of cryptocurrencies obviously circumventing and disrupting financial institutions, but a lot of banks are going to probably start building their own back-end blockchains just because it's so much more efficient than the 1980s technology that they're using to power the financial institutions. Whether they pass those savings and some of the efficiency on to end users remains to be seen.
Thanks, Aunnie. And then from Gino, another question is, which SA government department should adopt blockchain technology first and why?
And that's a really good question.
Yeah.
And we actually had a really lovely conversation about this with the premier, the former premier of the Western Cape, and everyone kind of sees applications within their own industry, and so there's, I think, from a land rights perspective, particularly with land restitution claims, there's a really big argument to be made around having some transparency in the process. I think just in general, the back end of government processes, tendering, things that are actually a little bit more mundane and that are just kind of government is one of the places that needs to start. So being able to fill out forms, obviously government being able to interact with individuals, even things like tourist visa or just visa applications in general. So there's a lot of stuff I think that's kind of the boring pieces of government that would actually have huge benefit to society, that would be interesting. And of course, financial institutions and being able to regulation and the collection of taxes. But for me, my answer is kind of honestly the boring day-to-day stuff of government that could be done more efficiently, more effectively, and more transparently. But that's not going to be in vogue with everyone, because it might mean that there are fewer, individuals that are necessarily needed to be able to perform some of those tasks. So that might be something that will be, and it's important to say again that transparency is not something that complete transparency is not something that everyone within every government wants either, regardless of if they're corrupt or not. Complete transparency is a bit scary for kind of private and public organizations.
And then I know that question was assigned to Aunnie, but Karl, as an honorary South African, do you have any comments on this question?
No, I mean, I think it's interesting. I am kind of a political, fan and student of the game, and so I do think it's very interesting on how it feels like the governments in general. I wouldn't play a party card per se, but how the governments in general are really kind of lagging behind, obviously, where technology is. But then you'll see some steps, right? Like, you'll see some steps from, SA, being, giving nods to digital currencies and tokens and things of that nature, where it's not as difficult to operate here as in other places. But I think, government will most likely be, much like corporate, will most likely always be lagging behind sort of this bleeding edge of where the blockchain community is, which is great, because I think it comes out of a place of, looking at current regulation and saying, this actually doesn't work for us. And so I always find this very interesting tension at blockchain conventions, where the regulators in there talking about, this is how we get you regulated, how we get you all legaled up, and everyone being like, I'm not really interested in that. So I think, to me, the community is kind of a mix of people that are like not interested in regulation to people that feel like regulation is the way forward to broader adoption. And actually, I think, the sort of time will tell, right? Like, I think the best adoption mechanisms are ones that, people, the individual end users feel like, hey, this just works for me. I don't know how it works. I don't understand all of the sausage making that happened in order for it to get to me, but it's filling a need, much in the way that M-Pesa fills a need. It's not blockchain, but it works. And so these are all alternative methods of dealing with a particular problem. So if tech is there to problem solve, then I think as long as we kind of keep that in mind, and stay focused on the end user, that's like the real thing that matters. Not so much whether or not political parties are going to push it or not. I think they're always going to be kind of like last to the party in my mind. Like, I think it's always going to be the passionate community of users, and then the passionate entrepreneurs that are behind it, and the developers that are behind it. We actually drive the adoption that everyone else follows in corporate and government. That would be my opinion.
Yeah. Thanks, Karl. Any other comments just to extend on what Karl has said, or I'll continue by asking the question for Karl. Thanks, Jenny, for your question. Karl, this is one for you. What is the revenue model of Snake Nation?
Yeah, I was just responding to that one in writing. So the revenue model is diverse. At its core, it's content licensing is kind of the biggest driver. So our model is basically assuming that, there's a very, sort of like broader addressable population of multicultural millennials. About 5% of those millennials will adopt Snake Nation as a platform. Probably about another 3 to 5% of those creators will have content that's good enough to license. And so when you start to talk about like major studios and platforms, so you have like a television network or a telco that wants hours and hours of content. Well, most times the people that are able to provide those multiple hours of content are actually traditional studios. And so this is where we're able to say, look, let's intersect there and start to say that, government, does have a role to play here to start to say, look, like, if your audience is different from your supplier pipeline for content, then you need to address that. And so if your supplier pipeline is not as diverse as your audience, and especially we know that to be the case here on the continent, then there's a role to be playing for like models like this, where we say, look, let's make sure that when you're licensing hours of content, do it with a business that actually is sharing revenue directly with young creators of color. And our job is to kind of act like almost like a union, right? We're in there doing collective bargaining. We're making sure that we're doing the best job possible. Maybe we're in rooms with access to deals that most creatives won't have. And so our job is to kind of negotiate the best possible deals at large for our community, then bring those back home and place that opportunity on the platform. So content licensing is a big one. Fees on transaction, not as big, much smaller. You're talking, 3 to 5% of like, e-commerce fees or transactions. You're moving, Venom to dollars and back and forth. And so you have those sort of like minimal transaction fees, but you really need a big, robust community in order for that to add up to amount to much. And so we see that as like something down the road once the community is at its height. But we don't really see that as like the main driver there. Sponsorships for people that want access to the community, both on the platform and on campuses, and then generating revenue from IP. So I think the last slide I showed like how you could have a property that leaps from a la Aqua Black Girl, that leaps from the internet to television, but there's nothing to stop that same platform from evolving into tours and merch and live events and other ways to like, basically, maximize that intellectual property. And so we see ourselves as key to maximizing both our own intellectual property and platforms that we create, but also to help our community generate revenue from other platforms that we may negotiate deals on. And so in those cases, if we say, oh, look, this is an amazing web series, we'd like to help you make this a television show, and we want to come in and co-produce with you, then we can do that. We're actually doing that right now with a group of creators who won our film contest from last year. We're helping them create a short film and taking it to festivals. We'll be co-producing that with them. And so in those cases, that's our 50-50 situation where we're saying, look, like, we're coming in here to help structure you deals, co-produce, co-create with you. And so we'll share the revenue with creators there as well. So it just kind of depends upon the nature of our relationship with the creators in question, and then how much, just how much we're involved and engaged. We could be light touch or we could be heavier touch depending upon the needs of the community.
Just to double check, Jenny, did that answer your question? Yeah, I'm sure it did.
Okay.
Ben to Karl, Carlito, is blockchain used to establish IP ownership? I think he means in this regard. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. So, and we could really get into it, but like when someone uploads a piece of content to snakenation.io and you're sharing that Venom token back and forth, then it's clearly one establishing, your ownership. We're looking at, sort of in, later versions of the platform, the ability to like then track that content once it leaves Snake Nation and go onto other platforms so that you can actually you can continue to accrue Venom tokens as it's shared on YouTube and so forth. So if you could think about, music videos, for example, right? Music videos are really promotional right now for artists, but we envision a day and time when someone can upload a music video to Snake Nation, share it out to the broader community. Then as that video gets shares, likes, posts, reposts throughout its life, we're there in the background kind of tracking that and assigning a value to that activity so that you can create a long tail effect on any piece of content. And so, ideally one day grandma's cat video should like be able to put you through college. Like that's our dream, right? Like pay your rent with your creativity, create generational wealth through your creativity. So absolutely the goal is to be able to establish who owns what. Because if you think about creative trends, so many of these trends start online and there's no way to track who actually did it and, whether or not they're going to receive any value. Or you'll have groups that have, 500 million views on a music video, but no record deals. And so we want to like help, be a part of the solution for horrible situations like that for creatives out here in the world.
I like that. Probably shouldn't go to the bank.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. One last question for Aunnie. What are the skills required to create a blockchain or a project based on blockchain? Are there any specific schools for that?
Yeah, I would recommend the Blockchain Academy.
Yeah.
So check them out. They do stuff in Joburg and in Cape Town if you're in South Africa. And they have intro and then others. And then also just online, there's great opportunities for free and also paid on Coursera and Future Learn and other places to get acquainted. But the Blockchain Academy has great instructors. I've worked with them. I've done courses with them. So I would definitely recommend them.
Yeah. And I back that.
Yeah, I'm gonna say
and then also, Jenny, if you want to connect after, a few of our engineers and developers also do introductions to Solidity for workshops. We've got some resources online that was actually taken from a blockchain community call. So have a look at that as well. I think that's a wrap. So just a few closing notes. A big thank you to everyone joining the call this evening and taking the time to learn some new cool stuff. Yeah, really insightful, both Aunnie and Karl's presentation. Thanks, Jenny. And then, of course, to our speakers, Aunnie and Karl, thank you for being so generous with your knowledge and interacting with our community. I hope to see all of you next month, same time, same place.
Oh,
thanks, everyone.
Nicole, thank you so much for orchestrating this and your awesomeness. We really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Karl.
Bye, guys.
All right, cheers. Peace, everybody.
Cheers, guys.